Dear friends, welcome back. Today I'm going to talk about another classic novel, Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is a romance novel of early 19th century written by Jane Austen. She started writing in the age of 16 and wrote 6 novels in her lifetime. Sense and Sensibility, Pride and Prejudice, Mansfield Park, Emma, Northanger Abbey, Persuasion. She wrote realistic novels which she observed in her society. She expressed her views on matrimonial complexities of society. The opening sentence of Pride and Prejudice is: it is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in the possession of a good fortune must be in a want of a wife. These lines makes it clear that this story is going to talk about importance of marriage as a goal to stable life in a society. Set of Pride and Prejudice is rural England in early 19th century. There is Bennet family who lived in the village called Longbourn in Bennet household. They have 5 daughters. First is Jane. She is the eldest of all. Then Elizabeth. She is the protagonist and second eldest daughter. She wants to build an independent life for herself with a partner she truly loves and respects. Third sister is Mary, who likes to read books. Fourth is Catherine, and the smallest one is Lydia. Mrs. Bennet only aim in her life is to get her daughters married to a wealthier man so that they can live a comfortable life. Mrs. Bennet heard a news that a young, wealthy man called Charles Bingley has rented a house called Netherfield Park in their neighborhood city. Mrs. Bennet finds this an opportunity to get one of her daughters to get married with him. She pressurized her husband to pay a social visit to Mr. Bingley and to invite him at their home. Mr. Bingley went to London and come back with his 2 sisters, his brother-in-law, and his friend Fitzwilliam Darcy. Her one sister was unmarried, whose name was Caroline Bingley, and another Louisa Hurst. The Bennet family and Mr. Bingley family attended a ball where Mr. Bingley spent his most of the time with Jane Bennet, the oldest Bennet sister. He danced with her twice, which was the symbol that they started liking each other. Bingley offered his friend Mr. Darcy to dance with Jane's younger sister Elizabeth. But Darcy refuses the proposal by saying she is tolerable but not handsome enough to tempt him. Elizabeth heard these lines and she develops hatred towards Darcy. Mr. Darcy is another protagonist and one of the proudest characters of this novel. His wealth and his manners were the reason for his proud behavior. He considers himself too good to dance with any of the girls, including Elizabeth. Elizabeth is proud of her rational thinking. She feels that she is very good at judging people. She develops a prejudice towards Mr. Darcy. Pride is the constant source of misunderstanding and misinterpretation, which leads to prejudice. This story tells us how pride and prejudice comes in the way to Elizabeth and Darcy union. Mr. Bingley's sister Caroline invited Jane to Netherfield for dinner. Mrs. Bennet sent her by horse intentionally as it was about to rain and she wanted her to stay there for a night. But Jane get drenched in rain, and fall ill. She was forced to stay at Netherfield for several days. Elizabeth went to meet and take care of Jane and had to stay there for 2 3 days before coming back home. On this day, Mr. Darcy found himself attracted towards Elizabeth's charm and intelligence. But Miss Bingley grows jealous of her when she found that Mr. Darcy is attracted towards Elizabeth because she was infatuated towards him. Mrs. Bennet was desperate for his daughters to get married to a wealthier man, so she wanted Jane to live at Netherfield Park for a few more days. But Elizabeth brought Jane back to their home in Mr. Bingley's carriage. When they came back, Mr. Bennet gave them the news of Mr. Collins's arrival. He was Mr. Bennet's cousin and the heir of the Longbourn estate. He would inherit Longbourn after Mr. Bennet's death because only male members in English society of 18th and 19th century had the right to inherit the property. Mr. Collins was a clergyman and intends to marry one of the Bennet's daughter. As Jane was engaged with Mr. Bingley, Mrs. Bennet offered him to marry Elizabeth, but Elizabeth rejected the proposal. Shortly after this incident, a military troop came to their neighborhood. Elizabeth and her family met the handsome military officer George Wickham. Elizabeth spent time with him and got attracted towards him. Elizabeth came to know that he is connected to Darcy family and they have very cold relation with each other. Mr. Wickham told Elizabeth a false story which she believed, as she was already filled with prejudice towards Mr. Darcy. He said that Mr. Darcy deprived him from the position of clergyman and took his position and cheated him. Hearing this, Elizabeth started hating Mr. Darcy even more. Meanwhile, Mr. Collins proposed Charlotte's Lucas, Elizabeth's friend, and she accepted it, and they got married. That winter, Mr. Bingley and Darcy left Netherfield and returned to London. Jane received a letter from Miss Bingley that his brother has changed his plan to marry her and he will marry Darcy's younger sister. Jane was heartbroken. Elizabeth thought that Mr. Darcy is responsible for this broken relationship. In the spring, Elizabeth went to visit her friend Charlotte and Mr. Collins. They now lived near Lady Catherine House. Lady Catherine was Mr. Collins' patron. She was also Mr. Darcy's aunt. She expects Mr. Darcy to marry her daughter as planned in his childhood. When Mr. Darcy comes to know that Elizabeth has come to her aunt's place, he visited there many times and proposed her. He declared that he loves her and wants to marry her. But Elizabeth furiously refused his proposal. She tells Darcy that he is very proud and arrogant and blames him for breaking the relationship between Jane and Bingley. She also scolds him for disinheriting Wickham from his position. Darcy was shocked and sad and returned back from there. He sends Elizabeth a letter. By this letter, Elizabeth came to know about Darcy's real character. He defends himself that he told Bingley to distance himself from Jane not because she is from low social status, but he thought that their love was not serious and they both are of two different nature. Darcy then clears the story of Mr. Wickham and tells her that he is a liar. Wickham's father, at the time of his death, asked Darcy to make Wickham a clergy and provide him with living. But Darcy wanted to study law and asked for £3,000. Instead of studying law, he spent all the money on his luxurious life and asked for more money, which Darcy refused to pay. Wickham tried to elope with his younger sister, Georgina Darcy. This was the reason behind their disagreement. This later changed Elizabeth's feeling towards Darcy. She returned home and acted coldly towards Mr. Wickham. After a few months, Mr. Bennet's brother, Mr. Gardiner and Mrs. Gardiner comes to stay with Bennet family and took Jane and Elizabeth along with them to Derbyshire. They visited Pemberley, the Darcy estate, in his absence and came to know about Mr. Darcy's kind and generous nature. Suddenly, Mr. Darcy appeared and was very surprised. He invited them to meet his sister. Elizabeth was very happy, but she heard a bad news that her sister, Lydia, ran away with Mr. Wickham. She was worried about Lydia and their family status. Elizabeth hurried home. Mr. Gardiner and Mr. Bennet went to search Lydia, but they failed. After some time, they were found. After pressure, Mr. Wickham was ready to marry Lydia in exchange of money. They got married. Bennet family was thinking that the money was paid by Mr. Gardiner, but later her sister Lydia told them that it was given by Mr. Darcy. Now, in Elizabeth's eyes, Mr. Darcy's respect increased. Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy came back to Netherfield Park. Mr. Bingley proposes Jane to marry him. Lady Catherine came to visit Elizabeth and tried to convince her that she should reject the proposal of Darcy, but she refuses her. Later, Mr. Darcy told Elizabeth that his feelings have not changed since spring. She happily accepted his proposal and got happily married. It's a hilarious book which tells us about the society of England at that point of time. We find it humorous and ridiculous in the way different characters behave and speak at different point of time. It mocks the obsession of society to find a wealthy man for their daughters, as the girls did not have the inheritance right. It's a must read book. For more book reviews, subscribe my channel. Thank you for watching.